Okay, so last tutorial was basically a huge sort of generalized overview, a whole sit down through the whole process thing of doing character design, or rather costume design, clothing design. This time I'm going to focus entirely on hair, hopefully within the next 15 minutes. So let's get started. One of the things that is kind of important when you're doing hair, especially with hair, is get the head done first. You know, it's like with clothing. First you get the body type. So first things first is the head. And I'm just gonna put like the head. My head is basically sitting on a separate layer, and so there's basically four characteristics that I think of whenever I deal with a haircut. There's the flow of the hair. So by flow, I'm talking about how the fibers of the hair flow down over the head. There's kind of a flow, there's a shape, there's a volume, and then there's the materials that you use. So flow talks mainly is it's mainly has to do with how the hair flows over the head, how the pieces are arranged. And there's different types of flow. You can get a flow where things kind of go up this way, and then everything's kind of upswept in the haircut. And another thing that's kind of important when you're dealing with the flow of the hair is that it's only at the sides that things are, really show their curvature, but in the middle they kind of go straight up like that. That's because if we were to treat this like a pin cushion, right? The hair on the sides is going to stick out radially like so, but then, as we get closer and closer to the center, I have to use, shorter and shorter hairs because, it's like these are pinheads, right? If I put pinheads, you can kind of really see how I'm thinking about this three-dimensionally. So flow is not just a two-dimensional thing, it is a three-dimensional concept. Now, here's another thing that you can do is that it doesn't necessarily mean that all hair must always flow out, this way. You can have hair which, you can do it in tufts. So if I want, I can take this area here, this would be one tuft right here. Then I can do another tuft here, and I'm kind of I'm centralizing the flow here, 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 So you can do it in tufts. You can flow is something whenever you're working out a haircut. You think of it in pieces. So there's portions of the head. Like this would be the area right in front of the ear, and you can make it go straight down. You can have them both straight down, or you can go asymmetrical. You can cut it short. They can be shaved. Hang on a second here. Okay, yeah, you can, they can be shaved. And, so it's like sideburns. You can have mutton chops. You can also curve. So there's many different shapes that you can get with each individual part of the hair. So I always like to think of hair in different segments, sections and segments. So that brings us down to, that was flow earlier that we just talked about, or that I just talked about rather, because I'm the only one talking here. But there's flow and then there's shape. So think about, how you want to take the hair on the head and divide it up. Hairlines are going to be different for, different people. Sometimes you can have, high foreheads, right? So a high forehead, almost like a receding hairline slightly, that has, one sort of effect. And, you have that really, usually you use it on like egghead types and, brainy people and whatnot. They have a lot of that high forehead, revealed by by a high hairline. But then you can also, move the hairline a lot, lower as well. And if you move the hairline a lot lower, then usually what you're looking at is something which will wind up covering, the eyes a lot more. And you wind up with hair that, basically winds up down here. The bangs cover the eyes a lot more. And so, these are all just different looks. Oh, it looks like my guidelines kind of went away. So let me just quickly get those recentered and corners of the mouth in there. Okay, so Yeah, let me just get that layer back on a hold layer, and I'll just lock those two layers off so I don't accidentally mess with them again. And okay, so then there's that hairline stuff. There's that flow. There's the different segments on the head, and then we get into things like shape. So I think one kind of really important thing when you're, let me just get my shape tool out. Okay, so with shape, shape is guided by that flow. You can, let me turn down the transparency so you can kind of see, or rather turn down the opacity. You can see how this, flow governs that shape. And you can get pretty large, shapes going. And if you look at a lot of Japanese cartoons, they always have like really, really huge hairdos. And also from the 80s, they have those. And working with the shape tool is really nice because you can quickly experiment with different haircuts. And you can really sculpt, and you can have the hair long in the back, long in the front as well. So there's so many, varieties, and I can't really tell you all of them. There's just not enough time. Some people make their careers as hairdressers. So my suggestion is try them all. Try them all. Get yourself a good shape cutting tool. Set up your layers, and practice, or just see all the different varieties you can get. Okay, so we're talking about shape now, and another thing you can get are pieces. I was talking about the pieces of hair, and the pieces don't always have to be gigantic. They can be much smaller, and this lends itself to another type of hairstyle. Not all of the hair has to be gigantic and huge pieces. You can divide it up like so. Sometimes when I use the large pieces, you'll see that I do this. I stair step, and this is a way of quickly indicating that the hair has been cut into severed pieces. Another thing that I tend to do is that at the top of the head, this is where I put shorter and shorter hairs. That there's this pattern that I'm always following, and that is, here we are. That there's a crown. There's a crown at the top of the head, and this is the pattern that it forms. The hairs get longer down the sides. This is just kind of a common pattern that I often follow. But you can have multiple crowns. You can have, I can have a crown on here, follow back up to there. Whoops, that was not very opaque. Here, let me just use black. Okay, and then you can have another crown over here. And, they can be symmetrical or asymmetrical. All right, I'm just going with symmetrical right now. And, that's something else you can do. So I would have, multiple, now that I've done that, I go in there and I can fill in, the gaps like so. All right. Here's another thing about shape is, let me just zoom in the corner here. And I'll show you, this is something that you could really practice, is radial line drawing, like so. So hang on, let me get a camera on this thing. Here we are. Okay. So with radial line drawing, all it is you have a center point. This is just an exercise that you should, that you could practice. And the idea is that every time you go out, you come back to the same point. All right. People have this tendency, it's a natural tendency to kind of rush through it and just kind of, like their center, they lose their center. So the trick is, to keep your center and be able to return to your center and always point back to that center. This is what allows me to, create, rapid hairstyles, is that radial effect. The other thing is patterns, is that you can go same, 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 or you can go large, small, large, small, large. like that. Or you can do large, smaller, 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 smaller. So, this is like a spiral effect, goes inwards. You can do large, small, medium, tiny, you know. The idea is that it's a combination of alternating shapes plus, getting smaller. So applied on the head, you wind up with something like this. So that would be just one of those patterns which is made one piece. I can do another one here. In this case, I will do ascending. I'm going to make it larger as we go to the other side. Same here. So it's the same pattern all the way through. And alternating, going large, small, large, very important. You also have to look kind of, where are areas looking kind of empty, and then you can just bump them up. So shape tools, are really handy for coming up with different hairstyles. We got 4 minutes to talk about materials. It's going to be really rudimentary. After you've worked out, a haircut, you can always lock the transparency of that layer, and you can put in highlights. So choose any color. It doesn't have to be a crazy color. I can take like this black and just bump it up a tiny bit, and then just do, I can just do like a little segment here. And you see it still applies that I can do that same pattern. So I'm just cutting into this, and it's not so much highlights as it is just a different edge, right? Or if I want, I can have highlights that work out radially. So there, I just do one little piece and maybe another, little piece. You put in too many highlights and it becomes the main hair color. So the thing about highlights is, only small amounts. And then going a little bit further, if you have, set up your brushes. This is more of the advanced stuff. If you have a custom brush, which is like this, see all these little dots, right? It's a brush stamp that has all those little dots. Then you can, you can do something like that, something which, map the size of the pressure, and do something like that. Then you can shuffle your color, and you're working on top of your shape. If you want, you can unlock the transparency and then just work over top of it as a separate layer. But now you're basically seeing how I use this to guide my brush strokes. Now I can just change the color, shift it around, shift the opacity, because not all hair fibers are the same. They're not all the same color, obviously. And I'm just laying these guys on top. So I'm working with layers, right? Here, I'll show you if I just switch to a different color. There, okay, so now you're seeing how this, I'm working additively. Let me just turn off that, So the idea is that if I work with a different color, you'll see how this lays over top of the other stuff. Okay, then I can choose, and I'm going to choose another color just to indicate, then these strokes, obviously, they wind up shorter. So that's how I like to think of it. When it comes to things like lighting, I can put in, a darker stroke under each layer, like so. So I put in those darker strokes, then I take the green, and I put back, and I use that darker stroke kind of as a way to shadow in. Then I will shadow on top of this. Right, then take that blue again and stick that on top, and work over top of my shadow. So again, that gives it that layered look. And then finally, there's things like highlights that you can throw in. So sorry this doesn't look great, because I only got 15 minutes on this auto recording doodad. But anyway, anyway, my videos have always been a little bit too long. And yeah, you can put in the highlights, and the highlights will follow kind of a ring pattern, like this, depending on how high the light is. If the light's really high, then the ring pattern, the ring highlights are going to shift. So there you have it.